The fine arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked inside my mailbox like a little bomb waiting to explode my peaceful suburban existence, and I knew immediately that Sandra Peterson from the HOA had struck again. I stood there on my driveway in Henderson, Nevada, holding the white envelope with the official Sunset Ridge Community Association letterhead, feeling my blood pressure rise before I even opened it. The June heat pressed down on me like a weight, and I could hear my rain barrels in the backyard making their familiar hollow sound as the recycled water system kicked on. Those barrels had been my pride and joy for the past 3 months, an environmentally conscious decision that saved me money and helped the community. Or so I thought. The fine was for $800. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered, reading through the formal language that accused me of violating Section 12.4 of the HOA guidelines regarding unauthorized exterior modifications and non-conforming installations. The letter went on to cite my rainwater collection system as an eyesore that diminished property values and violated the aesthetic standards of our community. I had lived in this neighborhood for 5 years. My name is Ryan Lawrence, and I'm a software engineer who works from home. I bought this place because it seemed quiet, well-maintained, and the HOA fees weren't outrageous. For the first few years, everything was fine. Then Sandra Peterson became the HOA president 18 months ago, and life became considerably more complicated for everyone on our street. Sandra was a 52-year-old woman with short blonde hair that she kept in that specific style that seemed to be standard issue for aggressive HOA presidents everywhere. She drove a white Mercedes SUV with vanity plates that read Rolls-Royce, and she took her position with the kind of zealous enthusiasm usually reserved for religious converts. Nothing escaped her notice. Nothing was too small for her attention. She had fined my neighbor, Tom, for having his trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day. She had threatened legal action against Mrs. Chen for planting roses that were apparently the wrong shade of pink. But this was different. This was about something that actually mattered. I went inside and immediately called the Southern Nevada Water Authority. If the HOA wanted to play this game, I needed to know exactly where I stood legally. The desert climate of Nevada made water conservation a serious issue, and I had done my research before installing the barrels. I had been certain it was legal. Southern Nevada Water Authority, this is Melissa speaking. How can I help you today? Hi, Melissa. My name is Ryan Lawrence, and I have a question about residential rainwater collection systems. I recently installed one at my home in Henderson, and my HOA is claiming it's illegal. There was a pause. Sir, rainwater collection is absolutely legal in Nevada. In fact, we actively encourage it. Can you tell me more about your setup? I explained my system in detail. I had 4 large barrels connected to my downspouts, painted a tasteful sage green to match my house's exterior trim. The barrels collected rainwater that I used for my garden and lawn irrigation. During Nevada's occasional heavy rains, this system could collect hundreds of gallons that would otherwise go into storm drains. That sounds like an excellent system, Melissa said. Nevada revised statutes explicitly allow rainwater collection on residential properties. Section 534.180, if you want the specific code. We actually have programs to help homeowners set up these systems because they reduce strain on the municipal water supply during peak usage times. Can you send me documentation of that? Official documentation? Absolutely. I can email you several documents, including the relevant state statutes, our conservation guidelines, and a letter from our office confirming that your system, as described, is fully legal and beneficial to the community water infrastructure. I gave her my email address and hung up feeling vindicated but also angry. Sandra Peterson had issued this fine knowing nothing about state water law, and she was trying to punish me for doing something environmentally responsible. The documents arrived in my inbox within 20 minutes. I printed everything, put it in a folder, and drafted a response letter to the HOA. I kept it professional but firm, citing the state statutes, including the Water Authority's letter, and requesting an immediate withdrawal of the fine. I delivered it personally to Sandra's house that evening. She lived 4 streets over in a house that was exactly 0.3% larger than anyone else's on her block. I had heard she measured. I rang the doorbell and waited, holding my folder like a shield. Sandra opened the door wearing white linen pants and a blue blouse that probably cost more than my water bill. Her expression soured the moment she recognized me. "Ryan, what can I do for you?" "I received this fine today," I said, holding up the letter. "I'm here to inform you that you need to rescind it immediately. Rainwater collection is legal under Nevada state law, and the Water Authority has confirmed that my system actually helps the community." She barely glanced at the folder I tried to hand her. "The HOA has its own rules, Ryan. We don't care what the state says. This is a private community and we have standards. You cannot create rules that contradict state law," I said, keeping my voice level. "I've documented everything here. The Nevada revised statutes are clear. Our CC and Articus give us broad authority over exterior modifications. Your barrels are ugly and they weren't approved by the Architectural Review Committee. The fine stands. If you don't pay within 30 days, we'll place a lien on your property." She started to close the door, but I stepped forward slightly. Not threatening, just insistent. "Sandra, I'm trying to be reasonable here. I followed the law. I made sure my system was tasteful and well maintained. This fine is baseless, and if you pursue it, I will fight it." "Do whatever you need to do, Ryan, but the fine stands until you remove those barrels or pay up. Good evening." The door closed in my face. I stood there for a moment, shocked by the sheer stubbornness of her position. This wasn't about aesthetics or property values. This was about control. Sandra couldn't stand that someone had done something without asking her permission first, even when that permission wasn't legally required. I went home and started researching HOA law in Nevada. What I found was both encouraging and frustrating. While HOAs did have significant power through their covenants, conditions, and restrictions, they could not enforce rules that violated state law. However, fighting an HOA often meant expensive legal battles that could drag on for months or years. But I also found something else. Nevada had recently strengthened its laws protecting homeowners who installed water conservation systems. Assembly Bill 275, passed just 2 years ago, specifically prohibited HOAs from banning or unreasonably restricting rainwater collection systems. The law had been designed exactly for situations like mine. I called a real estate attorney the next morning. Her name was Patricia Monroe, and she had a reputation for handling HOA disputes. Her office was in Henderson, not far from my house. "Mr. Lawrence, I've reviewed the information you sent over," Patricia said when I arrived for our consultation. She was a woman in her early 40s with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and glasses that gave her a serious, focused appearance. "Your case is pretty straightforward. The HOA is clearly in the wrong here. So what do I do?" "You send them a formal legal demand letter. I'll draft it for you. We cite the state statutes, the recent Assembly bill, and the Water Authority's documentation. We give them 10 days to rescind the fine or face legal action." Most HOAs back down at this stage because they know they'll lose in court and end up paying your legal fees. And if Sandra doesn't back down, Patricia smiled slightly, then we take them to court and we win. But it will cost you money and time, even though you'll likely recover those costs eventually. The bigger question is whether you want to live in a community where you're constantly at war with your HOA. I like my house, I said. I like my neighbors. I just don't like Sandra Peterson and her power trips. That's a common story in my line of work. Let me draft the letter. In the meantime, document everything. Take photos of your rain barrel system from multiple angles. Keep records of your communication with the water authority. If Sandra or anyone from the HOA approaches you, document that too. I left her office feeling more confident. The legal demand letter went out 3 days later via certified mail. Return receipt requested. Sandra signed for it on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, my phone was ringing with a number I didn't recognize. Is this Ryan Lawrence? Yes. Who's this? My name is Brenda. I live over on Copper Ridge Drive. I heard about your situation with the HOA and the rain barrels. Sandra Peterson fined my husband and me last year for installing solar panels. We ended up paying the fine because we couldn't afford to fight it. But if you're fighting back, I want to help. This caught me off guard. Help how? There are a lot of us who are tired of Sandra's behavior. She's fined probably 24 homeowners in the past year for ridiculous things. If you're building a case against the HOA, we want to support you. Some of us might even want to join a lawsuit if it comes to that. We arranged to meet that Saturday at a coffee shop in town. I expected maybe 3 or 4 people. 12 showed up. They came with stories and documentation. Brenda and her husband Mark had paid a $1,000 fine for solar panels that were completely legal under Nevada's solar rights laws. Tom, my next-door neighbor, had paid $300 for the trash can incident I already knew about. A woman named Jennifer had been fined for having a vegetable garden in her front yard, something that was protected under the state's urban agriculture laws. A man named David had been threatened with legal action for parking his work van in his own driveway. The pattern was clear. Sandra Peterson had been systematically abusing her position, issuing fines for violations that either didn't exist or contradicted state law, and counting on homeowners being too intimidated or financially stretched to fight back. She's essentially been running an extortion scheme, Patricia said when I told her about the meeting. Those fines go into the HOA's general fund, which Sandra has significant control over as president. I'd be very curious to see the HOA's financial records. Can we get access to those? As a homeowner in the association, you have a legal right to review the HOA's financial records. You need to submit a written request. They have to comply within 10 days. I submitted the request on Monday. Sandra's response came back on Tuesday, not within the legally required time frame, but as an immediate rejection. Financial records are only available to board members and are reviewed annually by our accountant. Homeowners do not have access to day-to-day financial information. Patricia actually laughed when I showed her the response. She's digging her own grave. Nevada Revised Statute Section 116.31175 explicitly gives homeowners the right to examine HOA records. Her refusal is illegal. This actually strengthens your case significantly. We filed a formal complaint with the Nevada Real Estate Division, the state agency that oversees HOAs. We also added the denial of financial records to our list of grievances. Meanwhile, Sandra escalated things on her end. I came home from a grocery run to find a notice taped to my front door. The HOA was scheduling a hearing for the following week to discuss my continued violations and potential additional penalties. The notice also mentioned that failure to appear would result in automatic assessment of all fines and potential legal action. "This is harassment," I told Patricia on the phone. "Yes, it is. But let's use it to our advantage. I'll attend the hearing with you. We'll present your case in front of whoever shows up. If other board members are there, they'll hear the legal facts and might pressure Sandra to back down. If it's just Sandra and her allies, we'll have documentation of their unreasonable behavior." The hearing was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Wednesday at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that hosted HOA meetings and the occasional book club. When Patricia and I arrived at 6:45, we found that word had spread. At least 20 homeowners were there, including most of the people from our coffee shop meeting. Sandra looked furious when she saw the crowd. She sat at a table at the front of the room with 2 other board members, Greg Hammond, the vice president, and Nancy Walsh, the secretary. Greg was a quiet man in his 60s who seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation. Nancy was firmly in Sandra's camp, a woman in her 50s with the same aggressive energy as her president. "This is a hearing for Ryan Lawrence," Sandra said loudly as people found seats. "This is not a public forum. I'm going to have to ask everyone else to leave." Actually, HOA meetings are required to be open to all homeowners unless they involve personnel matters or attorney-client privilege, Patricia said calmly. "These people have every right to be here." Sandra's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She shuffled some papers and cleared her throat. "Fine. Let's begin. Ryan Lawrence, you are here because you have refused to comply with HOA regulations regarding your property. You have installed rain collection barrels without architectural approval, you have ignored our fine, and you have submitted frivolous complaints about HOA operations. The board is prepared to increase your fine to $1,500 and place a lien on your property if you do not immediately remove the barrels and pay all outstanding penalties." Patricia stood up. "Miss Peterson, I'm Patricia Monroe, Mr. Lawrence's attorney. Before we go any further, I need to inform this board that my client's rainwater collection system is fully legal under Nevada state law. Specifically, NRS 534.180 and Assembly Bill 275 protect homeowners' rights to install such systems. Furthermore, your HOA's attempt to fine my client for illegal activity is itself a violation of state law." She handed packets of information to each board member. Sandra barely looked at hers. "We have our own rules," Sandra said. "You cannot have rules that contradict state law." Additionally, my client has requested access to HOA financial records, as is his right under NRS 116.31175, and you have illegally denied that request. We have filed a complaint with the Nevada Real Estate Division, and we are prepared to file a lawsuit if necessary. Nancy leaned over and whispered something to Sandra. Greg was actually reading through the packet Patricia had provided, his expression growing more concerned with each page. "The Architectural Review Committee has the authority to approve or deny any exterior modification," Sandra said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "Not when state law specifically protects that modification," Patricia countered. "You cannot require approval for something that is legally protected. That would be like requiring homeowners to get your permission before exercising their free speech rights." "This is ridiculous," Nancy interjected. "We're trying to maintain property values in this community." "Those barrels are ugly. They're painted to match the house and are barely visible from the street," I said, speaking up for the first time. "And the Water Authority has confirmed that they actually benefit the community by reducing strain on the municipal water system," Brenda stood up from the audience. Sandra, you fined us for solar panels that were completely legal. You've been targeting homeowners for doing things that are perfectly within our rights. How many of us have paid fines that we shouldn't have? Several hands went up around the room. Sandra's face was red now. Everyone who has been fined violated HOA rules. This is not about targeting anyone. This is about maintaining community standards. Then why won't you show us the financial records? David called out. Where's all that fine money going? That's none of your business, Nancy snapped. Actually, it's exactly their business, Patricia said. Every homeowner here has a legal right to review those records. Your continued refusal to provide them suggests you have something to hide. Greg cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable but determined. Sandra, I think we need to reconsider this. If Mr. Lawrence's system is legal under state law, we can't fine him for it. And we do need to provide the financial records if they're being properly requested. Greg, we've been over this, Sandra said. The board has full authority over community standards. Not when we're violating state law, we don't, Greg said more firmly. I don't want the HOA to be sued, and frankly, I don't want to be personally liable if this goes to court and we lose. That hit home. Board members could be held personally liable for violating homeowners' legal rights. Nancy looked suddenly nervous. I motion to table this matter until we can consult with our attorney, Greg said. Seconded, Nancy said quickly. Sandra looked betrayed. You can't be serious. I'm very serious. This hearing is adjourned. Patricia and I left the community center surrounded by grateful homeowners. People shook my hand and thanked me for standing up to Sandra. Brenda hugged me. Tom invited me over for beer. That went well, Patricia said as we reached her car. The board is fracturing. Sandra has lost control. My guess is that within a week, they'll drop the fine and probably issue a formal apology. What about the financial records? They'll stall as long as they can, but the real estate division complaint will force their hand. And now that other board members are worried about personal liability, they'll probably override Sandra and release the records. She was half right. The fine was officially rescinded 3 days later with a terse letter stating that, upon further review, the board has determined that rainwater collection systems are permissible within community guidelines. There was no apology, but the financial records were another matter. 2 weeks passed with no response. The Nevada Real Estate Division sent the HOA a formal notice of investigation. Still nothing. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Greg Hammond showed up at my door. Ryan, can I talk to you for a minute? I invited him in. He looked tired and stressed. I resigned from the board last night, he said. I can't be part of this anymore, but before I left, I made copies of the financial records. I think you need to see them. He handed me a thick folder. I opened it and started reading while he watched nervously. What I found was shocking. Over the past 18 months, since Sandra had become president, the HOA had collected over $40,000 in fines. But the money hadn't gone into community improvements or reserve funds. It had been funneled through a series of payments to a company called Peterson Property Services. That's Sandra's company, Greg said quietly. She created it last year. She's been paying herself for consulting services and community management. It's all her. She's been using the fines as her personal income stream. This is embezzlement, I said. I know. I didn't realize the extent of it until I really dug into the records. Nancy knew, I think. She's been helping Sandra hide it. But once you requested the financial records and threatened legal action, I started paying attention. Ryan, I'm sorry. I should have been more involved. I just didn't want to deal with the conflict. You're doing the right thing now, I said. Thank you for bringing this to me. I called Patricia immediately. She told me to bring the documents to her office and not to tell anyone else yet. Within an hour, we were sitting with the documents spread across her conference table. "This is criminal fraud," Patricia said, her expression serious. "We're not talking about an HOA dispute anymore. We're talking about embezzlement, possibly theft and abuse of fiduciary duty. You need to go to the police." "Will they take it seriously?" "With this documentation, absolutely. This is clear evidence of a crime." We went to the Henderson Police Department that afternoon. A detective named Sarah Reynolds took our statement and reviewed the financial documents Greg had provided. She was a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "This is substantial," Detective Reynolds said. $40,000 over 18 months. "How many homeowners are in your HOA?" "About 80, I said. "So she's been systematically targeting homeowners with bogus fines and pocketing the money. That's organized fraud. I'm going to need to interview other victims and examine the full financial records." "Can you provide me with a list of homeowners who were fined?" I gave her the names from our coffee shop meeting and others I had learned about. Detective Reynolds said she would begin her investigation immediately. "One thing you should know," she said. "Once we start investigating, this is going to become public. Your HOA is going to be thrown into chaos. You might want to prepare your neighbors for that." I sent out an email that evening to everyone whose address I had, explaining that the HOA president was under investigation for embezzlement and that the police were involved. I kept it factual and brief, but the response was immediate and explosive. My phone rang constantly for the next 2 days. Neighbors wanted details, wanted to know what to do, wanted to express their anger or support. A special emergency meeting was called by the remaining board member, Nancy, who was trying to control the damage. I didn't attend that meeting. Neither did most of the people who had supported me. Instead, we organized our own gathering at Tom's house, where we discussed how to rebuild the HOA once Sandra and Nancy were removed. Detective Reynolds moved quickly. Within a week, she had interviewed over 20 homeowners and subpoenaed the complete financial records from the HOA's bank. The evidence was overwhelming. Sandra had created false invoices for services that were never provided, had paid herself consulting fees that weren't approved by the full board, and had essentially been running a personal enrichment scheme using her position as HOA president. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning. I wasn't there to see it, but Tom was. He called me immediately. "Ryan, you have to see this. They just arrested Sandra, put her in handcuffs right in her driveway. Nancy, too. There are 2 police cars here." I drove over and parked at a distance where I could see what was happening. Sandra was being placed in the back of a police car, her face red with anger and what might have been embarrassment. Nancy was crying as officers led her to a second vehicle. Neighbors watched from their yards and windows, the drama of it impossible to ignore. Detective Reynolds saw me and walked over. "Mr. Lawrence, we've arrested Sandra Peterson and Nancy Walsh on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The district attorney will be filing formal charges tomorrow. I wanted to thank you for bringing this to our attention. Without your willingness to fight that initial fine, none of this would have come to light. What happens now? There will be a court case. You and the other homeowners who paid fines will likely be called as witnesses. The HOA will need to elect new leadership and figure out how to recover the stolen funds. But the criminal side is out of your hands now. It's in the justice system." I watched the police cars drive away with Sandra and Nancy inside. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I had just wanted to collect rainwater to help the environment and save money. I never intended to uncover a fraud scheme or see anyone arrested. But Sandra had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. The next few months were a blur of activity. The HOA held emergency elections, and new leadership was voted in. Brenda became the new president, with Tom as vice president. They immediately implemented transparent financial practices and rescinded dozens of questionable fines that Sandra had issued. The district attorney's office prosecuted Sandra and Nancy aggressively. The evidence was overwhelming, and both women eventually accepted plea deals to avoid trial. Sandra was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Nancy received 2 years of probation and a hefty fine for her role in helping conceal the fraud. The HOA filed a civil suit to recover the stolen funds, and Sandra's assets, including her Mercedes and her house, were seized to pay back what she had taken. Every homeowner who had paid an improper fine received a full refund with interest. My rain barrels remained exactly where they were, and Brenda's first act as HOA president was to officially amend the community guidelines to explicitly permit water conservation systems, solar panels, and vegetable gardens. The new rules emphasized compliance with state law and encouraged environmentally friendly practices. The local news picked up the story, and I found myself being interviewed by reporters about the importance of standing up to unjust authority and knowing your legal rights. The Water Authority even featured my system in one of their promotional materials about residential water conservation. Life in Sunset Ridge slowly returned to normal, but it was a better normal. The new HOA board was responsive and reasonable. They focused on actual community improvements rather than petty rule enforcement. The neighborhood felt friendlier, less tense. I expanded my rain barrel system, adding 2 more barrels to increase capacity. Several neighbors followed my example and installed their own systems. Tom put up solar panels. Jennifer expanded her vegetable garden to cover most of her front yard, and it looked beautiful. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 months after Sandra's arrest, I was in my backyard checking the water levels in my barrels when Tom came over with 2 beers. "Thought you might want one of these," he said, handing me a cold bottle. "Thanks, man." We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, looking at the rain barrels that had started everything. "You know, I never thanked you properly," Tom said, "for fighting back. I paid that trash can fine because I was afraid of making things worse. I think a lot of us did that. We just took the abuse because it seemed easier than standing up to her." "I almost paid the fine too," I admitted. "I was just angry enough and stubborn enough to push back. And I got lucky that Patricia was a good lawyer and that the law was clearly on my side. Still, you changed things here. This is a better place because you wouldn't back down." I took a drink of my beer and thought about that. It was true, but it had also been exhausting and stressful and at times scary. Fighting Sandra and the HOA had consumed months of my life and cost me several $1,000s in legal fees, even though most of it was eventually reimbursed. But it had been worth it. "I just wanted to collect rainwater," I said, and we both laughed. That became the running joke in the neighborhood. "I just wanted to collect rainwater" became shorthand for the whole crazy saga. A reminder that sometimes the most reasonable actions can trigger the most unreasonable responses, and that standing up for what's right matters even when it's difficult. The following spring, Nevada experienced an unusually wet season. My rain barrels filled to capacity multiple times, and I was able to keep my entire garden watered without using any municipal water for weeks. The Water Authority sent out a press release thanking homeowners like me for reducing strain on the system during a period when usage would normally have spiked. I framed that press release and hung it in my garage, right next to the rescinded HOA fine. They told the complete story, the accusation and the vindication, the fight and the victory. Brenda organized a neighborhood barbecue that June to celebrate the first anniversary of the new HOA board. Almost everyone from the community showed up, and the atmosphere was festive and warm. People who had barely spoken to each other before were now friends, united by the shared experience of taking back control of their community. I stood with a group of neighbors, including Brenda, Tom, and Jennifer, and we talked about future plans for the neighborhood. Someone suggested a community garden. Someone else proposed solar panels for the community center. The ideas were creative and positive, focused on making Sunset Ridge better rather than policing everyone's compliance with arbitrary rules. To Ryan, Brenda said, raising her drink, for having the courage to fight back when the rest of us were ready to give up. To rain barrels, Tom added, grinning. To rain barrels, we all echoed, laughing. As the sun set over Henderson that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I looked around at my neighbors and my community and felt genuinely content. The fight had been hard, but the outcome had been worth every moment of stress and uncertainty. My rain barrels continued to collect water, doing exactly what they were designed to do, helping the environment and reducing strain on the municipal system, just as the Water Authority had confirmed from the beginning. They sat there, painted sage green, matching my house perfectly, completely legal and completely beneficial. And if someone ever asked me if it had all been worth it, the answer was simple: absolutely. Because sometimes the smallest acts of environmental responsibility can lead to the biggest fights for justice. And sometimes standing up for what's right means uncovering corruption you never knew existed. My decision to collect rainwater had exposed a criminal enterprise, changed my community for the better, and reminded everyone that laws matter, rights matter, and no one, not even an HOA president named Sandra Peterson, is above accountability. The rain barrels remained, a quiet symbol of perseverance and principle, catching water from the Nevada sky and nourishing my garden, exactly as they should. And every time I looked at them, I remembered that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. The HOA had tried to fine me for rainwater collection. The Water Authority had said it was legal and reduced strain on the system. In the end, both statements told a truth, but only one represented justice. And justice, though it took time and effort and courage, had ultimately prevailed in Sunset Ridge, leaving behind a stronger, better community, and a reminder that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences when they refuse to back down from doing what's right.